Hello and welcome to Democratic Dialogue. This month we're talking about sustainability, energy, and society. I'm your host, Jeremy McKeen, and tonight we're joined by Dick Prouty, Professor Emeritus of Project Adventure Incorporated and the Co-Chair of TownGreen2025, along with Maureen Aylward, TownGreen2025 Steering Committee, as well as Professor of Sustainability at Endicott College, Northeastern University. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, Jeremy.
So we are right off the heels of the Sustainability Fair, hosted by TownGreen2025. And if you could tell us about the different pillars of Town Green, which is a program of the Gloucester Meeting House Foundation, and what we should know right off the bat.
Sure, we've got a great new website that Maureen and I and a couple other folks on our steering committee really put some time in. We've got 4 pillars. There's efficiency, which is how well all of your machines and things work, your cars and so forth, how well they work to get their jobs done. Renewable energy, which is how much fossil fuel and emissions are required, hopefully none. Renewable means none. And carbon sequestration, which is using natural systems to take carbon, CO2, the pollutant formed by emissions, out of the atmosphere. And finally, education and outreach. We're working on a K-12 curriculum sequence to really get our kids to be able to be 21st century citizens and understand what's happening and be able to address it.
Excellent. And talking about renewable energy and education and outreach, what are some examples of local action, either by companies or groups, that we've seen around Cape Ann?
Well, my focus with Town Green is in all of these areas, but Dick and I have been talking a lot about energy efficiency and renewable energy, which we covered at the fair, and also education and outreach with a local focus. But some of the where things are leaning in terms of renewable energy here on Cape Ann is towards solar, I think. Don't you think?
Yeah.
Dick? And
we've got the 3 windmills, but there's really political resistance to windmills, much more than solar.
Yeah, especially offshore.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, but even more in Dogtown. You know, we could put a lot in Dogtown, but people would not like that.
No.
And solar seems to be generally accepted in this area, and it also is the way to go. So while wind energy is definitely efficient, it is renewable, like we know, the infrastructure is great for a windmill to go up. But solar can be put on rooftops. It could be put on landfills, for instance. You know, Rockport has a program. They passed a zoning law to look at whether or not a solar farm could be put at the landfill there. And there's other things happening in renewable, especially with solar. So solar is really the electrification with solar. Moving towards that for people to think about is really important.
And at the Sustainability Fair, there were a lot of companies and groups that buy from solar farms, which is something that I hadn't heard before, as well as going off the grid but still using national grid. Town Green 2025. What's the 2025 in Town Green, and can you explain to me what carbon sequestration is?
Two big questions. Dick?
So the mission of Town Green is to lower our carbon footprint to 0 or as close to that as possible by 2025. 0 is going to be world shaking, but we're going to get it much lower. We've already made a lot of progress. And that orients everything we do. What's the footprint? How much carbon reduction, carbon CO2 pollution can we do with whatever we do? That drives everything we do.
In the region, Cape Ann region, so lower the carbon footprint towards carbon neutrality by 2025.
Right. Carbon sequestration is using natural systems to draw down the excess of CO2 in the atmosphere that's really heating up the planet. So we started out at 350 parts per million about 50 years ago, when we were up to about 410 parts per million now. We really need to get it back down, or we're going to have increasingly violent storms, increasingly rising sea levels, melting glaciers and so forth, melting Arctic ice that will raise the sea level in Gloucester and be a big problem. So that carbon sequestration is a very powerful thing, not to prevent emissions, but to take the emissions that have already been there, and they last literally 50, 60 years to 100 years in the atmosphere. They don't go away, and so we have to take them out and sequester them in forests. Sequester means bring into the trunks of the trees. So we have a partnership with Reforest the Tropics, who was at the fair, and the chairman lives in Annisquam, Harry Hintlian, and we are a 40-year-old organization. I'm on the board of that organization also. We have a presence in Costa Rica, where we've got a pilot program of 400 hectares sequestering carbon very, very efficiently. And you can look at their website. It's a very good website, and we'll be hearing more about them, as I'll talk later in the show about.
Excellent.
And carbon sequestration, just another view of that, is planting trees. You know, we all think about what can we do, and while you need to plant lots and lots of trees in order to get the power of carbon sequestration, you can do certain steps. So plant more trees where you can. Plant a garden and foster your soil to make it available to accept carbon. And think of it as also when you're traveling to buy carbon offsets, or in businesses, where my focus is and what I teach is how can businesses do things to reduce their carbon footprint. And one of them is a really helpful thing is to look at offsets as part of their overall carbon plan or carbon reduction plan. And purchasing offsets, whether it's working with a group like Dick just said, or doing something on their own, perhaps investing in China or investing in Brazil, or doing any kind of investment or conservation of land that can sequester carbon in large amounts. That's important. We can all do something, whether it's offsetting the emissions from travel, or buying offsets as a Christmas gift, or, you know, I mean, there's lots of ways you can offset it. But carbon sequestration as a tool is one way to work towards it. It's
sustainable.
Yeah, it's sustainable. Carbon offsets and carbon sequestrations are different, but it helps to. It's the same kind of language that I think is important to connect with.
So we've got our work cut out locally, but if you could talk about the global picture. America's pulled out of the Paris Accord. We have daunting reports by the IPCC. How can we wrap our head around the larger story with climate change in the world, and also maybe talk about how businesses and cities are hopefully moving towards a mission like TownGreen2025?
Do you want to start that, or I'll add on the global side if you want to.
Sure. Well, first of all, I mean, some people wonder, well, if we're taking CO2 out of the atmosphere in Costa Rica, how does that affect Cape Ann?
Right.
Even had one of my very educated board members ask that question. And the reason is because that the atmosphere circulates the Earth very quickly, and so it's a matter of days before the effect in Costa Rica is felt all over the world because of the air currents in the world. So there's a global effect of all of these things that interact, and even we might like to think that we can not go over the bridge and live on the Cape and forget about that, but the oceans will be rising, the air will be circulating, and it'll be either have more or less CO2. We'll be either warming us up faster or slower depending on how we all act and really help pull together to look at these four pillars and get involved. So I think I like to give that's one example of the interaction. I think that the IPCC, that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, had 1,000 of the smartest climate change scientists in Korea, and they really came out with a report recently that really shook the whole. Even current people like us who are engaged were shaken by their findings because they
Yeah,
were
the news is shocking.
more dramatic, and
Yeah.
Maureen would like to speak to that.
Yeah, the news from the IPCC is quite shocking because it actually shows that the most catastrophic impacts of climate change are going to be sooner than we think. And the report lays out quite clearly that 2040 will be an important tipping point to look at. So we have about a decade to make significant change or face the consequences of significant climate change, and that will be catastrophic. It will be catastrophic for Cape Ann and the East Coast, certainly, given what the climate science says about Greenland, the Greenland ice sheet melting. And we need to take these reports seriously. And because we have a very short window in which to try to move things forward. And even though the alarm has been sounding for quite some time, think about when you're asleep, right? And that point in time when the alarm, you really start to hear the alarm.
After 17 snoozes.
Yeah, if you keep hitting the snooze button, that's really what we've been doing with climate change. We have been asleep for a long time. We haven't heard the alarm. We've hit the snooze button every time it's come up, and now we can't. The snooze button is broken, and the alarm is growing. And not to be alarmist and talking about catastrophic climate change, but the fact is that we all need to act.
Sure.
And we love the place that we live. We love Cape Ann deeply, and there are things that we can do. So the report outlines some optimistic things that I wanted to point out. One, we have time. We have some time. And the changes in lifestyle that can be made are very important, whether that's energy efficiency, everything that Town Green is pushing for by 2025, making sure that your house is energy efficient, making sure that you're driving an electric car. These things make a huge difference. Having an understanding of where your food comes from and buying local. These are lifestyle changes. Getting on board with carbon reduction and emissions and supporting things like a carbon tax, to see that through in the state of Massachusetts. These are all finding the internal political will to do it because we can, but the window is short and it's closing. We're already seeing the major impacts of climate change right now. We cannot turn away from Hurricane Michael, can we? And see what happened in Mexico City and Florida, and these are right in front of us on the television. The wildfires in California and across the West. The super typhoons in Asia, our own issues with hurricanes and more frequent storms, the warming summers that we're having.
Lack of winter.
The lack of winter, right.
It's just warm all the time now.
So our world is changing. We're in the midst of experiencing climate change. It's no longer a thing in the future. And the IPCC report really puts that front and center. So something I was mentioning to Dick is kind of also thinking about it as the Revolutionary War, right? We all the patriots had to stand up and say, this is who we are as a country, right? That we picked up arms against the oppressor, and Paul Revere rode through the streets.
Through the Town Green.
Right, through the Town Green, ringing the alarm bell. Well, that's what we're doing right now, to say, get engaged, because it's not a war we're fighting. It's of a different nature, but we still have to bring that same urgency as Paul Revere did, in that, like, okay, let's get the troops together. Let's really work together to make a difference on this, because we can, and the technology is there. That's another good optimistic point about the report, is it shows we have the technology to make the change. So what is that technology? It's solar technology, it's renewable energy, and moving towards that quickly will help us to keep global warming under at least 2 degrees Celsius, because we'll overshoot 1.5 degrees Celsius, which was the cap that was reached at the Paris Climate Accord.
Yeah. And at the Sustainability Fair, Nathan Stinnett, the founder of the Environmental Voter Project, he kind of presented, I guess, what's an impossible political football, which is that people don't vote based on environmental issues. It's at the bottom of the list. This is democratic dialogue. Democrats have been on the forefront in terms of all the political spectrum in facing these issues. But if our country's not on board and other countries aren't on board, the individual gets lost. So how can we think about the voter? How can we think about environmental issues being at the top of our list? Is the common man and woman, are they going to care about these topics the way they should, or do we need an army of Paul Reveres?
We're all our own little Paul Revere.
Yeah, well, I think that I encourage people to visit the Voter Registration Project website. Nathaniel Sennett spoke at our fair for a good 20 minutes, and he made that, he said, how many of you voted? And most people raised their hand. He said, well, you'll probably be very surprised to learn that less than half of all of the people who are identified by analytics as really deeply caring about the environment, less than half of them voted in 2016. And the number was 3 million nationally. So if half of those 3 million, that's 1.5 million, a certain amount of them would have been in key swing states, we might be in a different position right now on the national level. So I think that we need to take seriously this whole voter registration project thing and get involved and understand it. I think locally what we also had at the fair was a panel on the carbon pricing policy. And the carbon pricing means that we have a tax on things like gasoline and heating oil to make them more expensive. That's going to be politically unpopular, but the way to make it popular is what the bill does is turns around and takes most of that money, 90+%, and returns it to individuals, families, companies, municipalities, universities, to roughly the tune of around $4,000 on the average middle-class family would get as a result of the carbon tax. So they're able to recoup what they lost and use that hopefully to go cleaner as well, because now there'll be incentives not to buy more gas, so we want to have electric cars, we want to get, use more solar and clean energy, and there'll be incentives for that. So the legislature in Massachusetts, we're fortunate. We have a very progressive, democratically controlled legislature that is one of the best in the country, really, and pressing things like this carbon tax to help us get out of the fix we're in. And both Representative Ferrante and Senator Bruce Tarr, Anne-Marie and Bruce are both for this very, very much, and they both backed this bill. It got pulled out at the last minute by a conference committee that was influenced by some of the more conservative members of the House who are influenced by the utilities.
What are they afraid of? Are they afraid that we're going to be squandering money on electric cars?
They're protecting monopolies, basically. I mean, the people who are against this are really protecting monopoly money that...
The fossil fuel companies are against it.
The fossil fuel companies are really they have all of their own subsidies, which are greater than clean energy subsidies.
Very true.
But
that should stop.
We have to dial those way back while we're increasingly subsidizing clean so that we can make this transition as fast as possible. And 10 years for the world is really a Herculean task. I mean, we're going to have to really take this extremely seriously.
One point about the Environmental Voter Project that I thought Nathaniel Stinnett brought home is the importance of voting in every election.
Sure.
So who you vote for is private, but when you vote is public record.
Sure.
So if you are only voting once every 4 years in a presidential election, for instance, the polls, the politicians are really not going to count you. What they're interested in is the voter who votes in every election.
Right.
And by voting in every election, even if it's for the dog catcher, do
we have that in
Cape Ann? I don't know, but it's local elections.
Right.
Voting in every election, even the local election, is vital to push up environmental concerns and climate change to a higher level on the list of voter concerns. Only then will politicians take climate change and environmental issues seriously. So the best thing that we can do is vote vote and continue to vote at every election, no matter what. Even if you don't have a candidate,
Sure.
get out there and vote, and encourage your neighbors and encourage your friends to get out there and vote. Because by doing this, we will bring more attention to climate change across the country, not just in Massachusetts, but across the country.
Great. And
So-
Cape Ann, we have a lot of wonderful partners with Town Green 2025. Locally, for someone like me, I am obsessed with environmental issues, and sustainability is a passion of mine. How can the common person, the average voter, the average just person on Cape Ann, how can they get involved? What can they do? Maybe speak to some of the educational outreaches and curriculum that you've been working on. Are we growing the next generation of voters who care about these issues? Are we doing enough for that?
Well, no, actually, the answer would be no. But it's moving in a good direction. Young people they love this stuff. They love this topic. They really do care, and they want to learn about recycling, and they want to learn about climate change, because it's their world that they're going to inherit. And it's very important to oftentimes change the angle of how we look at this issue of climate change towards young people, the next generation, babies, grandchildren. When you start thinking about it like that, it really brings all of us together in the same place. How is our young people going to be impacted by climate change? Greatly, in fact. The world will completely change. But Town Green 2025 is working on these curriculums for local schools, and working with teachers in local schools, both in Rockport and Gloucester, to create curriculum that is accessible for local teachers, to begin the conversation, to get a little more serious, to integrate it into their existing curriculum. Because really that's the key. It's for not to necessarily have something that's separate as a class, but for all classes to start integrating it into their curriculum, so that students can see the big picture through many different lenses.
And that curriculum is available to any school that requests it?
No, it's free on our website. We have all the lessons all put out there. For 2 years in a row, we've had teachers that we raise money for and hire to develop curriculum for their own classes and certain topics that we suggest, but they really do what they're really passionate about. And it's really been very successful at those are being used in Rockport and Gloucester, Manchester, Essex, and the teachers are very excited about it. So we want to continue doing that right through 2025, and we think that by 2022 probably we'll have something in every K-12 class. Excellent. And then we can keep deepening it, getting it more integrated, more project-based stuff. I wanted to speak about a project that I'm working on right now, so I'm speaking to the building committee of the Sawyer Free Library tomorrow.
All right.
About their upcoming project to take another shot at a plan to have a new library.
Wow.
And most people are very interested about this, and I'm presenting on an efficiency standard called Passive House that is basically the standard of Europe. It's about 2.5 times more efficient than the best LEED standard. Everybody thinks LEED is the best, and West Parish is made to the LEED standard. But really, we're pushing for Passive House to be somehow incentivized to be the standard that we have to really make every public building and many private buildings as efficient as possible. In Europe, they have building codes that have it built right in, so you've got to use it. We're a ways from that yet, but I think we can incentivize people to go there. And so we want to show how the new library can use Passive House for the same money as standard typical construction and make it so efficient that they'll save a lot of money on heating and cooling. It'll be a very comfortable building, and it will have much less emissions and very little emissions, and be an example, a model of what the city can do in many other buildings.
Excellent. We have a few minutes left. What's the hope we can take away from this? What's the, if a person or a family or a business wants to offset their carbon output, what can we tell people at home they can start doing or start thinking about?
Well, one of the things is visit the TownGreen2025 website, and on there are tools you can take your own carbon footprint. And it's good to get a baseline. In business, we talk about baselines, right? We want to have a benchmark, and then we want to see how we compare to that benchmark. And families can take their carbon footprint, and then keep track of it. Take that baseline and see how you're doing. Take steps towards reducing time in your car, or consider an electric car. This is important, as I mentioned before, this transition that we all need to get on board with. And it'll make our lives better, certainly, and make our area in Cape Ann healthier. But look at where your food comes from. These are steps. Carbon footprint. Take your carbon footprint. Reduce your water use. These types of things are very important. Have your house reviewed by Mass Save for energy efficiency. And what else can you do? So insulate your house. These are all great steps that we think about. Maybe we don't act on. Think about solar. Think about a solar rooftop solar. Think about, maybe investigating that a little bit more, because it saves money. And these are great steps. Yeah, the baseline. Right. How much
Talking about money.
Well, that's how you do your carbon footprint, right? You take your energy use.
And in 2025, what's my neighborhood going to look like? Downtown Gloucester or downtown Rockport? The air's cleaner. Cars are more efficient. So, parting words. You talked about technology. Maybe something that that we can talk about as the answer for families and businesses, and people can go to TownGreen2025 online.
Vote.
They can vote. We're looking at midterms in a few weeks. After midterms, that's kind of when the work begins, and I want to thank you guys for being on the show. And if people want to get involved, they can go to TownGreen2025.com, look at the 4 pillars, get involved. Do you have meetings that we can go to?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we're going to have further symposiums through Gloucester Meeting House Foundation. And I would just say get involved and let Representative Ferrante, Anne-Marie, and let Bruce Tarr, Senator Tarr, know that this really matters to you, and that you are in favor of carbon pricing, and that you're in favor of the carbon sequestration thing that we're going to be, a whole new program we're going to be working on to offset the school footprints. And get involved and let them know you care. That really matters. They do count the voicemails, they do count the letters, they count the emails, and it makes a difference.
All right. Thank you, and we'll see you way before 2025.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.